Well, welcome back everyone to Thinking That Matters. I'm Elizabeth Mahusai and I'm here with my special guest, Lara. And I am so pleased that you're gonna get to hear some of her stories. So enough about me. Lara, give them the 60-second version of who you are, what you do, and then I wanna dive into your story.
Okay, my name is Lara Hannigan. I have been in dentistry for 20 plus years. I love everything about teeth. I would consider myself an expert in the field, although I generally either treatment plan or manage the practice, but I love what I do, helping people. It's one of the best parts about my job.
Okay, so you kind of have a fun tagline. So I network with Lara, and I love your tagline, but I don't want to mess it up. So share your tagline, because I think there is there is truth to it that's important for people to know about.
Tooth wealth equals better health.
Yes, tooth wealth equals better health, because there's so many connections research-wise.
Yes.
That if our teeth are unhealthy, the rest of our body is likely unhealthy.
Yes, there can be systemic things that correlate between the heart and the mouth specifically, but also dental infections that go undetected can actually cause critical life-threatening situations.
So what got you into dentistry? I mean, 20 years is a long time in that field. So what drew you to it?
So I was actually working for a pediatric cardiologist, and I was looking for a job closer to home. And this dental job presented itself, and I applied for it, got the interview, and got hired. And I worked there for a couple of years, had a baby, stayed home for a while, and then when I went back to work full time, I went back to the dental field.
Oh, I love it. So obviously, not that we're going to deep dive in on the dental field, but tell the audience something that you're passionate about. Like if you had to say, I am passionate about this, what would that be for you?
I am passionate about recovery in all aspects of life, physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, or sometimes it's even in business recovery.
Now, if someone says to me that they're passionate in that space, oftentimes, maybe not always, that's connected to recovery in your own life. What led you to become passionate about recovery?
In my own life, my personal experiences, I am in recovery for an eating disorder for 20 years. I sponsor people in the program, and it's just really important because it gives people hope that they're not alone and that they can do it too.
Okay, so eating disorders, any type of, whether it's a disorder, an addiction, there's a lot of thinking that goes into that. So this whole podcast is about thinking that matters. So if you can, going back to when maybe that eating disorder began to overtake, is that a fair word? It overtakes you, or how would you describe it?
It's a compulsion. You think you can stop until you actually try and realize you're powerless.
Interesting. So walk me through thinking wise, like what was leading you to being that compulsion really taking hold, and then also the recognition, maybe that moment of when you were like, I am powerless. I'd love to understand a little bit of, as you've reflected, because you're 20 years in recovery here, what were some of the thoughts that were dominating your mind in the early stages of the eating disorder?
Oh, that's a loaded question. So some of the thought processes are, I'm inadequate, I'm not good enough, no one understands me, feeling worthless.
Wow.
And then when I confided in a friend that I had an eating disorder, she was the first person I told, and she asked me, can you stop? And I said, yes, I can. And then when I tried to stop, I found I was powerless to stop. It was an overwhelming sensation that I had to do it.
So the idea then of, you committed to your friend, I can stop, and then you recognize that you were powerless to stop. How did that impact you going on? How did that affect you in the midst of the eating disorder?
So what I actually started doing, Googling, Like, I wanted an answer for what was wrong with me. Like, I kind of instinctively knew, but like I needed to hear it from someplace else. So I Googled all the things, and I was all the things. I was depressed, and I had anxiety, and I had an eating disorder, and I had a substance abuse problem. And I asked for help.
Yeah. And so how long before, from the onset of realizing powerless to actually taking that first step of getting help, how much time transpired?
4 to 6 weeks.
Okay, 4 to 6 weeks. Now, I just want to go back for a moment, because is it fair to say you didn't get to feeling worthless overnight?
Sure.
So what do you believe, what was some of the domino effect of, because I think there are a lot of people who listen to this podcast, whether they're men or women, they're younger or older, this am I enough, or this sense of worth. So if we would say we're worthless, right, we're judging our sense of worth. I think that's thinking that a lot of people struggle with. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
So for me, a lot of mine is tied up in perfectionism. And as the eating disorder developed, my worth became centered in a number on the scale. And so, if I didn't lose another pound, I'm just not good enough, Got to do a little more, got to do it a little better, got to eat a little less, got to throw up a little more.
Wow.
Those really sick... it's an insane thinking process. It is all a problem. It is a mental disorder. And it is a problem with thinking.
Yeah, that's so just being able to acknowledge, right, that it is from a thinking standpoint, because what I see, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this as well, is that in our culture, we are caught up in this self-help culture. Right, like I recognize I have an issue. I'll just go out and change my behavior to deal with the issue, to the neglect of how our thinking was part of getting us there. So for you, was the behavior that you were trying to, in terms of maybe it's getting to that spot on the scale that would seem perfect? Was it more that was the behavior you were hyper focused on, or was it something different?
An eating disorder, like any other abuse situation, is usually a way that you're coping with internal emotion.
Okay.
It's a faulty skill set. I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, so a faulty skill set. So then you went to get help. So let's talk about how you began to change your thinking. Like, what were some of the ways in which they were helping you to change the root level of your thinking?
So, in any addiction situation, whether it's an eating disorder or alcohol or a drug, you have to stop the behavior first. The thinking comes later. The behavior has to stop before you can change the thinking. Because if you're in the middle of the behavior, you can't think clearly. Your thinking is altered. And whatever addiction you're using is perpetuating the poor thinking.
Yeah.
And so
it's like a vicious cycle, right?
It is.
And it sucks you in. So the behavior had to stop. Okay,
correct.
Keep going.
So I went to a day program where I was there from morning until 5 o'clock in the evening.
Okay.
I ate my meals there with them. They watched you. You had to leave the door open when you went to the bathroom so they could make sure you weren't expelling your food.
Yep.
And in amongst that system, I had individual therapy. I had group therapy. I had counseling with a nutritionist. I had art therapy. All of that contributed to destroying the thinking that was...
poor thinking.
The poor thinking.
Yeah. Because, go ahead. No,
and then
finish.
I was going to say, after that was over, because that was 6 or 7 weeks that I spent there, I then spent 2 years in ongoing therapy and counseling with nutritionists and weekly visits to the therapist.
So the thing that I would want to just acknowledge there is that in any poor behavior, regardless of how we want to call it, what we want to attach it to, rarely does someone get to poor behavior overnight, and we don't change poor behavior overnight. So you're saying you invested how many years to be in a better standing where your thought life was concerned, and the victory that you've had in this, in terms of recovery? Like, how many years did you invest in really hammering that?
2.5 to 3 years.
2.5 to 3 years. So as a listener, I want you to remember that when we've engaged in poor behavior, we're developing neural pathways that are very much strengthened by the behavior, and also by a lot of external factors, whether it's the people that we talk to, or what the scale says, whatever that, or even just the way they comment on how we look, or any of those aspects. So it takes time to not only disrupt the neural patterns that have developed in our mind, but we got to build new neural patterns.
Well, and on that note, I did, professional counseling for 2.5 to 3 years. But on top of that, I also did a support group that I'm still a part of, which I still work with people who have eating disorders, because it's that service. That right there, there is no motivation more noble than service prompted by duty. It is my duty to help someone in that situation that I've gone through, to give them hope. It's all about our experience, strength, and hope, because all I have to offer is what I've been through.
Man, I love that. That makes me emotional, because it's how I want you to talk a little bit about it's how we redeem what feels like sometimes for folks this awful, whether it's a season or event in our life. It's a redeeming way of it being used in wonderful ways in other people's life. So how is that fleshed out for you? Clearly you're serving and you're helping other people, but I would just love for you to speak to getting to that place of being able to serve and to help others in this situation.
So an open and willing heart, being willing to go through the hard things in order to get to the other side, because the only way to get there is to go through it. You can't circumvent it. You have to go through it. You have to feel the hard things, the hard emotions, the painful things, the trauma that you've had in your life. You have to go through all of it, and going through it, some of that with a professional for me was needed. But over and above that, when I think about, I have a real heart for people who are on the outs. Like when people think that their loved one is in a hopeless place, like they're never going to get better. They've had this destructive behavior so long. I just see the other side.
Because you are on the other side.
Correct. And that it's possible. And no matter what the statistics are, I don't care how low it is, people can recover, and can stay in recovery. It's really about the heart of the individual, and how much are they willing to work for it? What does it mean to them? Is the loss they're going to experience greater than the reward that they're receiving from the poor behavior? And for me it was, because I was given an ultimatum by my husband, but he was making a strong statement, and I needed to hear it. I needed to hear, if you don't do something about this, me and the kids are gone. And that meant everything to me, because they're my world. But it was enough for me to focus inward. And it was really about looking at, not about blaming others, but really, where am I contributing to this? And, was it just poor coping skills? Was it the trauma I had as a child? All of that went into it. But no one is a hopeless case, in my opinion.
I love that. No one is a hopeless case. You said something that sparked, it's a phrase that I use with clients, and just, with folks in general, that until the pain of staying the same is greater than the pain of change, we will not move towards change. And so for you, the pain of staying the same and the loss that would have been associated with that became greater than pushing through and figuring out what are my next steps to be able to do that. I so appreciate you sharing that. I would love to, from a practical standpoint, 2.5 years you spent really trying to rework your mind to think better, to stay in recovery these 20 years. What are some of the I like to call them pattern disruptors, because most people that would say, I'm an alcoholic, they say, I'm a recovering alcoholic, no matter how many years they've been recovering, right? Because there's still those tendencies that can come to mind that we have to be able to be an awareness of them, and then to be able to address them so that we don't get caught up in it again. What are some of the pattern disruptors, as I call them, that you've learned when something presents itself and you could revert into old patterns of behavior? What are some of the practical ways that you keep yourself on a good path of recovery, remaining in recovery?
So I call it the grace space.
Oh, grace
Space.
GRACE
Yes.
space. Okay.
Yes. Because when you're in an addiction, you tend to lie. It could even be about small things. So in recovery, being brutally honest is one of the things that you adhere to. And so when you're in recovery, there is this moment when somebody asks you something or you need to say something, that God gives me this moment of pause. And I'll be like, I want to tell a lie here, but I have the choice to tell the truth. So I choose to tell the truth.
That's a pattern disruptor. When we recognize I want to tell a lie, I'm choosing to tell the truth. It's where we're talking to ourselves more than listening to ourselves. That's a great pattern disruptor. I love that. So you call it, tell me again what you call it, the grace
Space.
Space. Woo. So space to give yourself grace to choose wisely. Would that be a reasonable way of describing that?
Yes. I just, there's this moment of pause where you're like, I want to do this, but I'm going to do this.
Okay, I love that. So denying wrong behavior and choosing right behavior.
Correct.
Oh, that is so good. And then I'm curious, as someone who I know you're passionate about serving and you're passionate about recovery, do you ever deal with that, what are people going to think of me when I share this?
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because I think there are people out there who have amazing stories of overcoming and being in recovery, that there is still this fear of how the rest of the world will see them, and yet the rest of the world can greatly benefit from their story. So I would love for you to speak to that.
The greater good is not about me. That's
Tell me what you mean by that. The greater good is not about me. What do you, tell me more.
Because my story, even though there are parts of my story that feel shameful to me, I do not regret that because it can help someone else. I speak to it because it can help someone else.
Oh, I love that. So the greater good is not about me. It makes me think of a book from many years ago where the opening line is, "It's not about me." Because it's not about me, right? It's not about you. I am so grateful for, well, one, knowing more about your story. Truthfully, for my audience, I just want you to know that I'm here with Lara at my Powerful Women Growth Group, and I had asked her to share our growth segment and then planned to record this podcast. And I truly had no idea exactly what the content of her growth segment was going to be, but I'm super grateful for that, because it's provided for really an unexpected, for me, opportunity for my listening audience to really delve more into this space. So it's called Thinking That Matters. For me, it's always about trying to help people think better. So for you, 20 years in, you said April of this year is 20 years of recovery. If you had to give one or two encouragements about how to think, what would that be?
Okay, so thinking that matters. Well, your thinking matters because it's your mindset. and your mindset will propel you forward or it will push you backward. And when you think something about yourself, whether it's positive or negative, that will produce an emotion. And your emotion is either positive or negative, but your emotion is also not fact. So
you're preaching to me. Yes.
So to know that, hey, I have this thought that produces this emotion, but it may not be based in fact or reality. To be able to evaluate that and then create positive thinking around that to change it.
Oh, so good. I think it might be worth just to build on that for a moment, because what she's talking about is our thinking. And the more we think something negative about ourselves, our subconscious just will agree whether it's true or false. And then we begin to act on that and a lot of times because of the emotion around it. So I love how you verbalized it, and I would encourage, just from a practical standpoint, it's awareness. She didn't use that word, but it is an awareness of this emotion, and this emotion may not be true or may not be based in truth or fact. And it's choosing to reject things that are untrue, which means we need to, when we can have a basis of what is true, that's very helpful, but reject what is untrue and replace it with what is true. So today, Lara, what are the things you say to yourself that you know are true that help to keep you anchored in truth so that your thinking continues to put you in the right forward direction?
I will have faith that is bigger than my fear. I realize that I am a valued child of God, and the more that I take care of myself, I am honoring and loving Him. That's my biggest, and that is actually in a book, and a lot of places that page is ripped out because it resonates with so many people. But I'm a kind human, and I try to treat myself lovingly and do good things for myself, and also forgive when I'm not in the best space.
I love it. I'm so grateful for you. So grateful.
Thank you.
I just want to encourage the listening and viewing audience that your thinking matters. And when you choose to cultivate thinking that matters, you can live a life that matters.